So welcome everyone. I'm actually calling this experiencing no self number 16. So we're kind of continuing the no self series, and we're talking about awareness specifically in this session. This is actually a pretty important session, pretty important topic for many reasons. For one thing, it's, what in this practice increasingly we're directed to, draw our attention towards that, the awareness that's in the background, right? I've been listening to different meditations by Tara Brach and John Kabat-Zinn and others, and they're really talking about, this resting in awareness. This coming back to awareness. So it's important that we kind of know what that is and why we're doing that. So this session might get a little. There's some concepts that I'll have to weave into it, but I want to try to make it as experiential and direct as I can. So when teachers say you are not your thoughts, you're not what you think, you're the awareness of your thoughts. Perhaps you've all heard that. You're not your thoughts, you're the awareness of your thoughts. You're not your body, you're the awareness of the body, and so on. What they're really pointing to is a non-identification with those aspects, what I've been calling ego, right? Mind, emotions, perceptions, memories, and then we also the body. So they're really pointing to a non-identification with that, and they're directing your attention towards this thing called awareness. So, as our identification with the ego falls away, and at some point completely falls away, when any sense of identification with those egoic aspects, thoughts and memories and perceptions and emotions, when that dissolves and you're resting in awareness, there's a shift in identity. And this is a really important shift. There's a shift from, so the self no longer identifies with the ego. The self is identifying with the witness, with awareness. That's why I kind of broke the two apart. It's no self. So that there's still identification, but it's with awareness, consciousness, whatever word we kind of want to give it, still presence, being, and so on. And this is a much different identification. I called it, I think, in the meditation, exalted state. It's a much higher order dualistic identification, right? There's still subject object. There's still a me resting in awareness, right? So there's still a subject objects, but it's a much higher level of dualism than identification with the ego. And in fact, it can feel so good that you never want to leave it. Right? Why would I want to leave this state of complete, it's so peaceful and happiness is just always there. I'm just living with the natural flow of life because I'm not struggling with life living itself. I'm lot of people just say, I'll just stay here. Thank you very much. I'll just continue to identify with, with being rather than as a being rather than a doer. Um, and some people will even think, oh, this is enlightenment. Wow, this is great. This was, worth the trip. So worth the price of admission. And a lot of teachers will just kind of, so many teachers just kind of leave it at that, right? Resting in awareness. And that's kind of, as far as the teachings will go. It's because it's very liberating. It's kind of like waking up from the dream of the ego, right? It really does have that taste of a deep awakening from a dream. But it's also a stepping stone to ultimate liberation. And that's why I kind of, when I threw that in at the end of the last session, I didn't intend to drop that, but life unfolds, right? And now I have to kind of take you down into that journey about what I actually meant by that. So first we awaken from the ego. The self is no longer identified with the ego. And that's really what I've been walking you through for the last 15 weeks, is kind of chipping away at the identification with thoughts, emotions, perceptions, memories, and body. And just inviting you to kind of, just look, is there a substantive, independent me in there? Am I in control of any of this? And that's how I come at it. Am I in control of my thoughts? Well, no. Am I in control of this body? Or does it kind of get sick on its own and, breaks down a little here and there? And am I, in control of how I perceive things? Is this just a lot of conditioning that's being lived out? So that was, the invitation, is to awaken from the egoic self. But it's not the end of self. There's now a self that's identified with the witness, with the awareness, right? There's still a subject and an object. But we're no longer identified with this very small, seemingly separate being that struggles with everything. There's a much vaster sense of spacious life when one's identified with that vastness of awareness. So it's a higher form of self-identification, a much higher level of identification, rather than I am, my thoughts and my body. It's kind of I am all that exists. I am awareness. So there's a kind of unity in that as well, because it's the awareness that you have the same awareness, you have the same awareness, and you have the same awareness. So there's a common sense of non-separation. So it's a profoundly liberating sense of self. But again, it's not the highest form of reality. We're not experiencing no self, really. We're experiencing no ego, we could say. Yeah. So it's often mistaken for for no self. This identification with awareness. So we're, as I said, it's a higher level duality with a sense of witness. So now we move into the distinction between witness and what is being witnessed. And the sense of a witness falls away. right? The sense of a witness can actually fall away, so that there's absolutely this is kind of a non-dual sense of non-duality in awakening. So, as I said, when there's a witness, there's still a subject and an object, right? There's still awareness being experienced, right? You have to, in a way, perceive awareness to rest in it, right? So you have to have a perception, a subject perceiving something called consciousness or awareness or being or presence, or whatever we want to call it. So there is a sense, there is a subject that has the only way to create that perception is to desire it. Right? You're right, in a sense, create the desire to rest in this thing called awareness by saying it. There's an object that's desired. There's a me wanting awareness. Me wanting to be witnessed. So there's still that subject object, and of course that's an illusion as well. That's also an illusion. The intention to rest in awareness is an illusion. The Buddha called intention sankhara. Right? He talked about intention as sankhara. And what he said about sankhara is sankhara are like a city of fairies, like illusions and mirages. They are like dreams. Can't be any more direct, really, than that in pointing to the illusory nature of this thing called witness. So, in a way, to rest in awareness, we have to reify awareness, objectify it. Right? And in doing that, there's a subtle binding to it. The word nirvana or nibbana in Pali simply it means unbinding. Is the translation of nirvana. So there's an unbinding between this identification with any aspect, including awareness. And this unbinding can only be loosened by seeing the emptiness of awareness itself, seeing the emptiness of awareness in our direct experience. The same way we've been seeing the emptiness of all the aspects of ego, the emptiness of thought, emptiness of emotions. And emptiness just means no inherent existence, independent existence. So in the five aggregates, if you remember the five aggregates, the five heaps that the Buddha said are not self, are no self, the last one is consciousness. And vijnana. And when in Pali, when the Buddha is saying that, he's saying, in that sense, that level of consciousness is the knowing that arises with the object, right? So in that sense, like if you take a bell, the bell is experienced with consciousness. The arising of the object bell and the object of consciousness arise simultaneously. So in that sense, it's no self because it's simply arising simultaneously with objects. That level of consciousness. But seeing the voidness or emptiness of consciousness is even more subtle than what the Buddha was talking about in the five aggregates. And it really needs to be seen in direct experience, and it'll deepen over time. You'll hear this talk, and the mind might not make too much sense out of some of these words, and that's fine. But I'm just kind of planting seeds. And I also want to clarify some terminology as well. So this can seem confusing. As different books and texts and teachers, always talk about the always and already, resting in the always and already, always present awareness. But it's a provisional teaching. It's not a definitive teaching. It's a stepping stone. In fact, if you really, like, whenever the Buddha spoke, he spoke to the people that he was teaching. Never kind of spoke in a general sense. It's just like I try to speak to the group that's here in front of me. I have some notes, but and it's usually the same people showing up, so I kind of know how to direct the teaching. But it's I'm speaking to you. It's not the same talk I would give to another group, or another group here, or another group there. Even if they were, so-called advanced practitioners, it would still be different. So he's always talking to the people that are in front of him. So a lot of the teaching, he was talking to people that are just, starting out on the path, or, a lot of times just groups of people. So he gave a lot of kind of provisional teachings, just stepping stones to get people along the way. I mean, you sit down with somebody who's just exploring the teaching, and you say, everything is empty, including emptiness. That'll just be, what does that mean, right? And even if you tried to then explain it, the mind would just get more and more confused. So of course you have to kind of step people through these things. And not only that, so that's one part of it. The other part is, because of provisional teachings being offered, there's all kinds of debate between scholars, non-dual scholars, Buddhist scholars, even within the same lineages. There's all kinds of debate about these questions, and this can cause apparent confusion for the mind when you read all these different viewpoints. And on top of that, there's really no consistency in the use of terms like consciousness and awareness. People use them in all different ways. So then it gets even more, the waters get even more muddied. One thing that I think in my practice, and in the fact that the Buddha called no self anatta, right? That's a key word, anatta, in the teachings of the Buddha. I think probably the most key word, that in emptiness perhaps, but that word is a Pali word that clearly points to the negation of Atman. It's the an is the negation of Atman. And Atman is what was in the Buddha's time, what was considered in the Hindu tradition, in the Vedas. It's a Sanskrit word which refers to a true self, or a soul, or an essence. So the Buddha, in coming out and saying there's no Atman, was very contentious, revolutionary at the time. Wasn't a popular guy with the hierarchy in ancient India. Neither was Jesus, right? Not a popular guy. So these kind of, in a way, revolutionary teachers kind of turn the hierarchies on their head by pointing to the direct truth. So Atman is, this essence is clearly negated in the anatta teachings. So all these things are empty of an inherent existence. Everything is empty of inherent existence. And I mean everything. And what I mean by empty of inherent existence is everything is dependently co-arising. We've talked about that, how everything is dependently co-arising. You can't have, if you took a grain of sand out of existence, everything would fall apart. It would all collapse. That's how intimate everything is contingent. It's another word I sometimes, it's contingent, mutually contingent on everything else. Nothing exists on its own. It's all unfolding together in a sense, dependently co-arising. And it's all a fabrication of the mind. Everything that we experience, see, touch, smell, it's all a fabrication of the mind. It's all mind created. And therefore it's empty of any inherent existence. It's dependent, it's contingent, and it's fabricated. So I mean, I've said a lot just in that statement, but to kind of let that filter in. If the mind's having troubles with that, that's okay. It's almost to be expected. So to regard awareness as the source or the background for all experience, as I've been kind of saying, is perpetuating a sense of inherent existence to awareness. It's like it's always and already there. It gives us some sense of permanency. And therefore we could miss the deeper knowing, the deeper understanding of the emptiness of everything, including awareness or consciousness. Where else can I go with this? This is, lots of people speak about awareness and consciousness in this way. Dogen in the Thai in the Tibetan tradition really talk about the awareness in this way. Tara Brach has more and more been talking about awareness in this way. Buddha nature, so that has that sound of something that does inherently exist. That's right. It's your essence, right? Your Buddha nature, or your pure awareness, or in Zen they might use the term big mind as again your essence. Some teachers in the Thai forest tradition, Ajahn Chah, for example, and you've heard Ajahn Sumedho refer to consciousness in this way, as being a sense of, it's very similar to Buddha nature in the way that they spoke about consciousness. So this can be a dilemma for the mind, apparently. Joseph Goldstein's book, One Dharma, one of his early books. If you have that, you might have that. If you've been around this for a while, you might have that or have read it in the past. And he struggled with this very question and wrote that book to try to, to resolve this in his mind. He had studied insight meditation, and then was studying with I can't remember, one of the Rinpoche, and was studying, and they were talking about, Buddha nature and so forth. And he had this kind of existential crisis in terms of, what is true, what is the truth. And he actually kind of came down with the idea that I don't know. I don't have to know. I don't know. And I can embrace all the methods as skillful means towards liberation. Skillful means stepping stones, in a sense, towards liberation, as opposed to statements of absolute truth, is, I think, the way that he put it. So my approach is kind of similar to that. So in my practice, I've kind of seen that awareness is a stepping stone or a bridge to the unconditioned. Because it has a sense of being always present. Right? It has this distinct sense of always and already being there. But at the same time, it can be seen as only there in relation to objects. There has to be an object in order for awareness to be aware of something. So it's seen as in relation to the arising of objects. So being aware of awareness is holding a perception of awareness, which fabricates awareness as an object. As soon as you say aware of awareness, you're holding awareness as an object. So in my practice, the awareness that is perceived, and this is really important when I'm kind of getting into here, an awareness that is perceived is conditioned and fabricated a consciousness of objects. So that's the awareness that's perceived. And if you're resting in awareness, you're kind of perceiving, in a sense, awareness for the most part. That's what I imagine. That's what I did, and I imagine others are doing that as they're practicing. And as I said, there's a huge sense of liberation in that. I'm awareness rather than I am all these thoughts and emotions and all this chaos that kind of arises on its own. But there's also something else that could be considered awareness. And that could be what's being spoken about by some of the others. I think it is in terms, I've done trainings with in the Dogen tradition, and Matthew Flickstein was also very much a non-dual teacher. There's an aspect that's not perceived, whether we call it awareness or consciousness. It's not perceived, and it's really sensed into as void or no thingness. And you'll, in longer retreats and deep kind of states of concentration, and the mind's very settled, a sense of void can arise. And there's no perception. You don't actually perceive it. It's just, it's a no, it's a no, has a no thingness. If that makes any sense at all. So you can kind of see there's an aspect that's the unconditioned nature of awareness. It's the emptiness of awareness. So they can, in my experience, they can kind of both be true. You can practice with a perceived awareness. And I think as your practice deepens, you may touch into the no thingness or the void aspect of awareness. Like if you look at the jhanas, which are the 8 levels of absorption, of concentration, the 8th one is called void. And that literally, to me, could be, but that's what's being referred to in the, by some when they're talking about awareness or consciousness. So again, different definitions, right? Same word, but very different. One's conditioned, one's unconditioned. Um, uh, So how do we practice with this? Yeah, so the process is to look, well, to notice what's arising, and to see, to allow, accept, and kind of let go into the no thingness that is there. So you're letting go of awareness as well. So you're seeing, so when you look to see, who am I, or what is me, because we've been calling it the me, what is this me? You can look directly and see that there's no seeker, there's no witness even to be found. That even witnessing just arises on its own. Seeking just arises. You can get a real sense for even the one who's noticing, looking, seeing, allowing is not inherently existent. There's absolutely no self in any of this. So that's, now you're letting go of self completely. You're letting go of the, because we talked about the seeker, now you're letting go of the sense of a witness as well. So we're letting go of any aspect of a self or perception of a self. And I like the word no thingness these days. Everything is empty or no thing. It's devoid of any inherent existence, any center, any boundary, any owner, any intrinsic self. So I've really kind of taken you down. I mean, that's the end of the road of self, right? When you've let go of the witness, the seeker, thoughts, emotions, there's nowhere for you to rest your head. I think Jesus said that, didn't he? Or there's some, I'll probably contrast it. For birds, there's the trees. For the foxes, they have their holes. The man has nowhere to rest their head. There's no self. And that, that can sound to the egoic mind, that sounds horrible. That's like death. It's the annihilation. And so if you're listening to this talk from the point of view of the egoic self, it's resisting dramatically right now, the egoic self. And that's what's arising, and that can be expected. But from the listening from another place, it's very liberating to live from that sense of emptiness. And now, of course, once you've let go of all that sense, so if nothing has an inherent existence, kind of hacked away at that. That's probably not a great metaphor. We've kind of, in a way, kind of chipped away at the self sense, or the not the self sense so much as the identification. with aspects that we think are a solid self. But that now extends to everything, because I said everything is empty. So this is empty. This is empty. All objects have no inherent existence. So you see that you're empty. But now sit in a room full of people and actually see and know that they're also all empty. So now that's taking it outside of the self. And that's a real step. I mean, to actually know in your bones that not only are you empty of a egoic self and any self, but so is everybody else. Very freeing, very liberating. Yeah, so I'll stop there and open it up to any questions or any comments or dialogue if people have some experience with working with awareness as well. That would be helpful to hear as well. Really letting go of the witness here. Did I shock all the egoic minds into absolute? They're all the egoic minds go, I got nothing to say to that one. I thought, yeah, and the reason a lot of teachers just take people up to resting in awareness is because it is so freeing. It is such an exalted state. And I mean that when I say that. You could rest there for forever, and you'd feel very rewarded by the practice. Yeah. Did somebody? Anita said she has to leave early. So that's fine, Anita. Thanks for letting us know. Yeah.
Hey, Stephen. Thanks. That was really good. I just had a couple of things. One was I was thinking about lately. I've been thinking about kind of the concept of ego, and I wonder if the ego, in the religions, like in the Islamic religion and Christian, Judaic religions, they talk about the devil. The ego kind of seems like the devil. It's pulling you away from pulling you away from the actual absolute truth, which in all those religions would be this monotheistic God. Anyways, I'm kind of working with that right now. I seeing the ego as the devil really just being a kind of another word for ego, just with some horns put on it. And the other thing that so anyway, I don't know if you've heard anything about that. That would be interesting to hear your comment. The other thing, I was walking my dog tonight, and I was just walking, and there's kind of like, it's dark and just some light coming down a really quiet street, and and I was thinking about like I had been thinking about like quirks and quarks and these atomic forces, like that actually are supposed to bind protons and neutrons together in the nucleus, and what are these forces? You know, like there's these forces. There's the weak force and the strong force and the electromagnetic force and the gravitational force. Like these are the four fundamental forces in the universe. But you try to look up where does the force come from? And they say, well, it comes from the protons when they come close. That's where the force comes from. It's like, well, that doesn't tell me still where it comes from. So anyways, I was thinking about this, and then I just started doing some mindful walking. And it just kind of came to me in a flash that like this walking here is really, the walking is really the closest, like the verb that I'm doing, whatever verb I'm doing, the walking, or if I'm looking at something, that's really, to me, that's really the closest kind of, it just came to me, the closest kind of thing to words that actually describe the sense of that kind of voidness, the actual verbs, because even the verbs themselves are empty, but when we have language, right? And I feel like the verbs kind of come close because there is, you know, that without the, you know, that nature is just this vast, it's just energy, and we call it energy. Those concepts are empty too. Every word that I'm saying is empty, but just so I can actually have a discussion, it's just energy moving around in different forms. And so it's really the verbs that actually describe this nothingness, or this. I've heard Surya Das, I was reading something by him recently, and he calls it the great flow. That's what he calls this nothingness. And I mean, he calls it other things too, but yeah, it's the verbs, like there's something with the verb like that touches it. To me, it touches it a little bit more closely than other parts of our language. Yes. Thank you. That just came to me tonight.
Yeah, we're more verb-like than we are noun-like in terms of our life experience. Right? Walking, there's only walking. Seeing, there's seeing. There's only seeing. I'd like to go back to the ego as devil. I wouldn't want to. So I would. So in Buddhism, there's a tempter called Mara, which is maybe closer to the concept of devil in other traditions. And it's kind of a tempter, you know, tempting one away from enlightenment. I'll just understand one more thing and then you'll be enlightened. Just figure out one more thing. Just, you know, it's that kind of tempter. But to the danger in seeing ego as bad in any way is that ultimately, even after awakening, the ego is still there. We don't get rid of the ego. We just don't identify with it as being who we are. Big difference. So, so your personality will still be there. One thing I've noticed is, the old conditioning kind of gets burnt through, but there's still aspects that are still there. So yeah, you're all going to freak out when you hear this. So my impatience story, how I worked for years to relate to impatience by feeling it in the body, and then it lost its juice and impatience didn't arise. Now I'm actually playing around with actually just being impatient. If impatience arises, I just, that's this ego that got formed here through conditioning. So I just go, oh, I'm impatient. And I find my wife's a little kind of likes that because she's kind of used to, she married an impatient person. And when impatience kind of died, it's like sometimes we just have fun being impatient together. We'll get in a line and go, oh, isn't this terrible? Like, look how slow that person is. Like, why can't they just kind of speed up they should do more training here. We should write a letter or something to we just kind of dwell in this. And it's not upsetting or anything. It's just like, it's this, this is what impatience feels like. It's amazing. It's actually an amazing state, if it's believed, right? But it just as a state, it's kind of fun. It's not kind of harmless. And so anyway, so it's kind of an acceptance of those egoic aspects. Once they're seen through, well, that's fine. You don't want to be what's the word, a teacher, an automaton, is that the word, or something like that? Just kind of a robot or no life. What's the Zen saying? Before enlightenment, there's chopping wood and carrying water, and after enlightenment, there's chopping wood and carrying water. And then they have another one, a mountain. Before enlightenment, a mountain is a mountain. But during awakening, a mountain is no longer a mountain, right? It's empty. After awakening, a mountain is a mountain. So you kind of right back, right? So there's that. So yeah, the ego is kind of a cute and cuddly thing when you don't identify with it anymore. It's got all this, all this stuff, right? That it's the problem when we identify with it. I know this is kind of out there, but I'm just planting the seed of this practice is definitely not about getting rid of the ego. It's just not identifying with the ego, and that's important. And I know that as well. But we kind of the fact that the Zen have that saying means we do slip into kind of watching the conditioning just kind of dissolve and dissolve and dissolve. So you are kind of seeing this identification with, because you're seeing it's empty. It's just passing. It just passes through, but it doesn't mean we never visit it again. I'm not saying we sort of temper tantrums or but you can kind of maybe watch that if that arises as something to do. But yeah, just personality still there. Your quirks still there. Your proclivities might still be there. Some might drop away. Some new ones might form. But yeah. And yeah, what you're talking about, the quirks and quarks, that's so incomprehensible, eh? I just love that incomprehensible stuff. That's one of those incomprehensible, and it's like almost another word for emptiness. It's all just so incomprehensible. And I read last month that they figured out that there's actually likely 100 million more galaxies in the cosmos than we originally thought. Like that just like the we're in one little one. There's 100 million more than, I don't know how many we thought there were in the first place, like a billion. I don't know. Like it's incomprehensible, right? And then the energies and quirks and how this all holds, it's just incomprehensible. It's fun to for the mind to play around with it, of course, but I think that's part of the practice too. Is not trying to figure this all out. It's really just listening and not struggling with this kind of incomprehensible existence that's unfolding as us. Francine has to leave as well. Bye, Francine. Yeah. Yeah.
Stephen, I found this evening's discussion just fascinating. It's a lot to absorb. I was particularly struck when you were talking about Joseph Goldstein, when he was, and he wrote a book about this, but when he was dealing with these questions, he had kind of an existential crisis, and eventually concluded, I don't know the answer. And it just made me reflect on my whole sort of, I guess, spiritual kind of journey over the years. And I think along the way, it's been a search for meaning and wanting some sort of security in knowing something is true, and that there, and the process has sort of moved me to accept a lot of things that might have been seen as having meaning as they're just empty, and I'm okay with it. So, accomplishments in life, at one point, maybe that was important, but now I don't see any meaning, and I'm okay with that. So it's sort of, just notching along ever so slowly. And as you've taken us through this process, it's like, well, the body's empty, the thoughts are empty, all those kind of things. But I recognize that I was still latching on to the awareness as having some sort of meaning. There's something divine acting, or I may not completely understand it, but there's something there. Now you're pushing that next step further, and I'm feeling some discomfort again arising. It's not at the point of existential crisis, but I can feel the discomfort. And so I think for me, there's a huge part of this practice is gradually accepting more and more that I don't know and I can't know, that there's just mystery and there's no answers. And I don't think I would have been anywhere close to being able to even explore that, a few years back. But even with the discomfort, I feel like I'm able to sort of move into that a little bit. Anyways, if you have any comments on that, I'd be interested.
I love that you're feeling some discomfort, because that's really what, this is kind of just moving us into, out of our comfort zone, I guess, is one way to put it, into seeing things, looking in new ways. And that can be uncomfortable, in particular for the egoic mind, right? So I think when Joseph said it was his egoic mind that was having a crisis, right? Which is fine, and just to see that a crisis occurring. There's the crisis occurring, and that's ultimately, I think, how he perhaps looked at it. Just the egoic mind feeling discomfort, feeling that it's a crisis. It needs to figure this out, and it can't. And I think for Joseph, he had invested his life into the teachings, and now he'd hit this kind of this inconsistency, and he'd always kind of envisioned, a one dharma, and here there are, competing ideas within the dharma, which is all fine. Yeah. Makes the world interesting. As long as we're not identified. Again, this is the whole identification part. All these opinions and beliefs, and it's all this stuff going on. As long as we're not identified with them, I mean, you're going to still have opinions and beliefs. Just don't identify with them. And don't take it personally if somebody has another one. Right? That's part of the non-identification, right? It's not personal. Yeah. So I'd like to, I think we're perhaps moving into how we could start to talk about how does awakening to no self, right? It's no longer no ego, or awakening to no self, no witness even. How does this play out in life? Like a being, as a being moves in the world.